Hey everybody, welcome to the Brand Sisters. I'm Claire.
I'm Alexis.
And today we're going to be talking about why your ideal client is not choosing you.
Ouch.
Yeah. This might not be true, and hopefully if it's not true, then you're not listening to this episode. But
this is good.
Yeah, for some of us, this might be helpful and revealing.
Yeah.
But I think for all of us, I think most companies, most businesses deal with this at some point, right?
Absolutely.
They're like, wait, no, why didn't they choose me? Or like, why is my business not as successful? Why is, our profit not quite what we would anticipate, right?
Yeah, and even if it's not happening repeatedly, I think all of us had times where we're like, wow, they were the perfect fit for us.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't they choose, or we were the perfect fit for them?
Yeah. Or we could have been good together.
Yeah. Yes, this could have been a great thing. Why didn't they hire me?
Right.
Oh, I'm excited to hear about this.
Great. So this was inspired by a quote by a Harvard business professor, Gerald Saltman, and he said 95% of buying decisions are made in the subconscious. So that kind of just like got me thinking a little bit as to like what goes on in the consumer mind before they're making a business purchase, whether that's like buying into a service or buying into a brand. It doesn't have to necessarily be like pulling the trigger on purchasing, but ultimately that is kind of the point, right? We do want them to support whatever we're doing. But so I think that in this day and age and in this climate, the age-old saying of it's not personal, it's business could not be more false. I feel like that phrase just doesn't apply anymore.
You're right.
And there's been like, I think the last couple decades, right, with the rise of social media, it's shifted businesses completely to where like if a business isn't a brand, then it can't survive, right? So because of this whole shift, we've seen this in business. I mean, if you looked like 50 years ago, right, or even 20, 30 years ago compared to now, you see that businesses have built up such a personality, right? Each business has such a personality to the point where like, if you just Google brand, like you can dive into like the 12 brand archetypes and like brand personalities and the tone of voice and the, it's like so, multi-layered in terms of what goes into building a business that just did not exist decades ago, right? Like decades ago, it was cool just to like open up shop, you have the local hardware store and like you don't even give it a name, right? Like it's just the local hardware store. It's so different now, right? Like you Google detergent and you get like thousands of listings on Google, right? If you're trying to find like shampoo, there's like hundreds of different companies that you can choose from now. The average consumer is bombarded, throughout the day probably hundreds of times by different, marketing ploys and basically businesses trying to get their attention. And so because of that high stimulus for us these days, we've just become a lot more discerning, right? Like I think the consumer has become a lot more discerning and we're much less likely to purchase from someone that we don't have a connection with.
That's true. And I want to say something about us being more discerning. I think that that's partially true. I think another thing that's true, though, is companies have gotten so great at marketing to us. So while we're discerning, they're doing things that are so strategic to get us to buy or invest in them, right? It's not just like everything you're saying that's, very eye-opening for me thinking about, you're right. If we wanted anything, shampoo, Dad would have taken us to like the local CVS or whatever it was, and that's where we would have gotten it. And now we search for things, we're looking for things, right? We're
comparing
or like we've seen somebody else that's marketed to us and we're interested and we're invested. So I think we are more discretionary, but we're also being targeted to in a very specific way, and some people are so good at doing that we invest in that way as well. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah.
So,
yeah. No, it's such a different climate. And I feel like we're kind of at a unique point at our age where we get to see that difference, like we get to see kind of that comparison of what how much it's evolved. And I think that, obviously it's just become very apparent that we are bombarded, right? I mean, we talk about that a lot anyway, just with like the stimulation, just like the pure stimulation. And so because of that, we have to like just, starting up your business and you think you know what you're doing and, but you have other competitors, like that's just, it's not enough, right? Like it's not enough just to feel like you're doing it right.
Right.
Like there's so much research that goes into making sure that you have a business that's built to succeed, right? It's different these days. When I was a kid, we were obviously, as most of listeners probably know at this point, we have a big family, 6 kids. And I remember speaking of hardware store, we were at like, what was the hardware store we were younger? It wasn't Osh. Was it Osh?
Yeah,
okay.
in Watsonville?
Yeah. We were at Osh, and
which was a weekly activity.
Yes.
Somehow we needed to go to the hardware store, or Dad needed to go to the hardware store every week, and we would go to the hardware store.
Yeah, exactly. It was like a Saturday, routine that we would go run errands with my dad, and then he'd take us to lunch, and we look forward to it every week.
Yes.
And we're going once, and a lot of kids, this happens every now and then. I got lost in the store, and I remember being so scared and terrified, and running through the aisles, trying to find somebody. And then I remember I was walking down one aisle in particular, and all of a sudden, from like way behind me, I heard someone call my name. And with that, I didn't even have to turn around. I knew it was Antonia. Like right away, I knew it was my sister Antonia, and it was familiar, right? And so I turned around and thank God, like I was saved. Unfortunately, that was not the only time
Claire got left.
that happened.
Claire got left.
Literally everywhere. Literally
so she has reason to be concerned when she's lost, because we used to leave her places repeatedly.
Literally everywhere. I'm the quiet one in our family, and so it was just like not unusual for me to.
And there were not cell phones in those days, so
yeah, exactly.
we picked her up.
We figured it out. Always found eventually. Yeah.
Yes.
But the whole point of that story was just like, I didn't have to see her. I didn't have to be around my family to have recognized and heard her voice, right? It was familiar to me. And I think that there is, when we find a brand or business that we resonate with, there is something there's something familiar, right? And it may not be like familiar in the sense that like, I think that it could go 2 ways. One is like familiar, where it's like, yes, this is a similar voice to like values that I have, right? This is a similar voice to maybe what I speak to myself, or what other people that I love, how they speak to me, right? It's a good familiar voice. Or it's a voice in the sense that like, I want to be more like that, right? Like It's a familiar voice of like aspiration,
yes.
But either way, without having to belabor that point, there's a familiarity in it, right? There's something about it that makes us feel at ease and we're not on guard, which I think is like super crucial, right? Like if at any point with a business we feel like we have to put our guard up, like we're just being, harassed basically by like all these marketing attempts, and we can tell like someone's just trying to take our money, like that we will automatically say no. What was interesting, this Harvard business professor talked a little bit about how much of our buying decisions, because it's 95% subconscious, so much of it is just like primal, that like we don't want to take risks naturally, right? Like we are naturally more cautious creatures, and we don't want to, when it comes to like making a decision that is going to cost us something, like money wise or time wise or whatever it might be, we don't want it to be in vain, right? And we don't want to put ourselves in danger, whether that's like our finances or physically or emotionally, whatever. We want to make sure that it's a solid investment. So I think in a sea of a lot of noise and a lot of competition, and not necessarily like other competitors in our field even, but it's just like a lot of competition, a lot of noise, period, that people are getting, consumers are getting. We need to be familiar so that when they are in a huge store and there's a lot of, noise and people around or whatever, like they can hear that voice and they resonate and feel like, okay, yeah, that's familiar, and I want to move towards that. I mentioned this in another podcast, but for me, some of those businesses are like, Patagonia, Free People. I feel like those when I see something from them, it's like a breath of fresh air, right? Like, I like to see their stuff because I think for them too in particular, like, I love to aspire to being that active, free-spirited individual. And so it's more of like an aspiration, right? And so because of that, like, I want to be around them. I mean, you think of like when you're in high school and you see like the cool kids, like, you want to be cool, so you want to be around those cool people, right? Like, there is so much of like that familiarity in terms of being around people we want to be like. And then I think that it's really important to understand that, like, you know, good branding makes you money, right? And if we have any like inkling that a business is two-faced, right, or like is not genuine or authentic, then we will run, because there's tons of other options, right? And so that's why good, solid, consistent messaging is so important. If you are saying one thing and acting a different way, then it's going to send the wrong message. And we think about, you know, just with people, like, if you're hanging out with somebody and they're acting one way with us and then they act a totally different way with somebody else, like, there's just a red flag that goes off, right? And it breeds distrust, right? Like, we don't want to spend time with that person. And the same with businesses, right? If we don't feel like we can trust them, we're not going to spend time with them, and we're certainly not going to buy from them. I think of examples of, and I think that, like, I think we take this for granted a little bit. It's like, oh yeah, like, I'm a wellness coach, like, you know, obviously I give health tips, right? But, you know, I've seen like some wellness coaches give like investment tips, you know, it's like, why are you doing that, right? Like, that's off-brand, right? And so it confuses your messaging, and it confuses the audience, right? They're like, what if you're not predictable, right, to some extent, then it can be confusing, and confusion leads to a lack of trust, which leads to distancing, right? Like, then we don't want to be part of what they're doing. So, you know, for example, like a high-end real estate agency, if they are selling multi-million-dollar homes and they're writing blog posts about debt, you know, how to get out of debt, that's attracting the wrong audience, right? They don't want to be selling to people who are in debt, right? Like, that would be opposite. Like a trusted insurance company, they don't want to be like posting grainy selfies of them by the pool, you know, like that's conflicting messaging. But you see that all the time, right? Like, on social media especially, I think people often blend personal and business a little bit too much, to where it gets conflicting. So I think if we could kind of boil it down to two takeaways, it would be to be predictable when it comes to what your ideal client can expect from you, and making sure that if you say you're going to provide something for them, that you do it, right? So just basically being true to your word. And the more true you are to your word, the more reliable that you seem, and then the easier it is for your ideal client to trust you, and then eventually, you know, build a connection, and then they could be a loyal fan, right?
Right.
And then the other takeaway would be to be human. Make sure that you are showing the face behind your brand. Because especially with our climate, with so many competitors and so many people in the same industry, we have to make sure that we are setting ourselves apart and showing the person that's behind it. I think that offers the opportunity for connection, right? If the business is just kind of cold and distant, which I don't think businesses think that they're being cold and distant, right? But if you come across a website and there's no like opportunity for you to like actually see somebody that's beyond like your classic like stock photos, you know, it just makes it less of an opportunity for them to really see someone that they could connect with, right? Mm-hmm. And that is, we're human beings, like, we are made for connection, and so we want to see that, and we want to have that in our businesses too.
Right. I think that, first of all, when you're talking about predictability, I think it's so important to clarify that doesn't mean boring. Predictable isn't boring. It's not cookie cutter.
Right.
What you're talking about is if somebody's investing in you, and investing in you may look like investing in like your social media marketing, in your email marketing, right? That they're invested in those ways. They're following along to view that they should know what to expect because they've given you that part of them, right? They've given you the open door for connection, and they want to know what they could possibly get and make sure that is consistent, right? And again, that stuff is all should be designed when you're building your brand. We talk about those points because it doesn't mean not personal, and that's important to clarify too. That because most of us work in industries that are populated with people doing the same thing, we are our unique value proposition, right? So we need to make sure that we are the distinguishing factor in our brand. And that doesn't always mean just who we are, but how we do things and like our unique ways. And that also could obviously be company values too. We're not just talking about personal as in ourselves, but it's so important to make sure that those things are designed to appeal to our ideal client so they know what they can receive from us.
Absolutely. And I think if we were just to go back to the, Gerald Saltman quote of like 95% of our buying decision is subconscious, I think that what ultimately that is saying is that there is so much about the way that we connect with people and the way that we connect with businesses that is below the surface, right? Beneath the surface. And a lot of that is just like intuition and sensing and feeling and, the vibes that we get like from people and businesses that ultimately, we are like gut creatures, right? Like we've been told by our, parents and grandparents, like follow your gut. There is wisdom there, right? Like we just do that naturally. And so we have to stop underestimating our consumers, right? And our potential, clients and visitors to our site and social media, whatever. Like we need to stop underestimating our ideal client. There is so much more that gets communicated than beyond what is seen, right? Beyond what we just simply put out there for face value. There's so much that goes beneath that. So I think if I could take a second just to encourage, us and, anyone who's listening and just all businesses that, just to go back to their core, right? Go back to like their identity and who they are and to find a home in that and to feel really comfortable there, right? Because if you're able to do that and you feel like you really understand who you are, then you're able to, it seeps out so naturally, and there will be a genuine trust that unfolds and a reliability that unfolds and a genuine connection that unfolds, and that paves the way for your ideal client to really feel like, yeah, you're a familiar voice, you're a wanted voice, you're a welcomed voice, and you're a voice that like I want to have in my life, right? So just kind of, just to remember to be who you are as we get told by our mom all the time.
Yes.
So if you want to read more about that blog post in particular, make your way to our website, animela.com. Come hang out on social media. We're on Instagram, TikTok. Check out our podcast. And where else are we? We're everywhere. Come hang out. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.